This month, on a special best of edition of Talking Pictures with Neil Rosen, we have interviews with many award-winning stars. Sarah Paulson talks about her recent thriller, Run. William Shatner discusses his acting technique. Tyler Perri shares his thoughts on New York, and Samuel L. Jackson speaks about the latest version of Shaft. We've got all that, our usual heated panel discussions, and many more celebrity interviews coming up. I'm Neil Rosen, and welcome to Talking Pictures. It's our Critics Roundtable show, and this month, we're looking back at some of my favorite interviews from the past year with many top stars and directors. They'll be talking about their recent films, and as always, we have our panel discussing those movies. Now, you can watch any of these films because they're either all currently streaming, on demand, or on DVD. So let's kick things off with a look at something called Run.
Well, finally, we have a film that's at least a little more fun, if not predictable. This is starring Sarah Paulson, and she redefines helicopter mom. She's taking care of her daughter, Kira Allen, who's a teenager with a disability who uses a wheelchair. She's also a diabetic and an asthmatic. But is she all of those things? Look, the thing about a thriller like this, and it's from the same director who gave us Searching last year with David Kim, and that was a fine first film. This is his second effort. The thing about what makes these fun is whether or not you really go for the ride. And I went for the ride for a little while. However, you're going to see the end coming very quickly in this thing. So even with the great Sarah Paulson here, I'm not sure I was that thrilled with this thriller.
This movie is very predictable. You see everything that's coming. It steals from dozens of other movies. Misery leaps to mind. And it's kind of junk, but junk can be fun and entertaining. Billy Wilder, the great writer-director Billy Wilder once said that if you create tension, you will keep the audience's attention. And this kept my attention. I mean, I was tense throughout the whole thing. And I think that Kira Allen, who is a wheelchair user in real life, and Sarah Paulson both give fun performances, and I enjoyed it. Justine?
Yeah, and eerily enough, this recalls the true story of Gypsy Rose Blanchard, which was chronicled in the miniseries The Act. And yes, you do see the twist coming, but as you said, Bill, it is from the same director of Searching, which utilizes just a computer screen. And in the same way here, this is utilizing a very small space. It's all about the camera work, as you said, creating the tension, and really using the camera work and the editing to evoke a certain feeling and really explore it from a psychological point of view, not just to be about the pulling the rug underneath at the end.
Lisa?
I'm a huge fan of films about Munchausen by proxy, which is actually the disorder or the pathology that's going on in this film. But this is the most boring take on it I've ever seen, because it's essentially relegated to backstory for a really middle of the road thriller about a crazy mom. And by all means, demonize the mom as if that is not a tired enough trope for cinema. I love Sarah Paulson, but she has got to start holding out for better material.
It's a fun suspense thriller. You'll see everything coming, but it won't matter. And I sat down on Zoom with Sarah Paulson to talk about the film. Let's take a look at that interview.
I've been following your career for a real long time. What made you want to step into this particular genre?
I thought the script was really interesting. I love this idea of just thematically, what does it mean to be a mother, and what does because I'm not a mother, what does that bond look like when it has a kind of a potential sickness at the core, meaning for Diane mentally, and how that it was just an interesting thing for me to explore.
Next up is a movie called Senior Moment. Perri, tell us the story.
So this one stars William Shatner as a man named Victor. He's a retired NASA test pilot living in Palm Springs who absolutely adores his car. When he loses his license because he decides to drag race in it, he's forced to use public transportation for the first time. And for him, that means a new commute, seeing new things, and meeting new people. And that's how he meets Jean Smart's character, and we get a little romance between them. I mean, clearly this one has a lot of big talent, but it ultimately doesn't matter because none of them can salvage this or breathe any life to it. It is just rarely funny. It's extremely predictable the entire way through. And on top of that, I kind of found Shatner's character a little off. I mean, not a little, a lot of off-putting all throughout the film. And that made him impossible for me to root for.
Bill?
The cars are really nice. Listen, I do want to give a shout out to Christopher Lloyd here, who's his buddy and is also in Nobody. He's 82 years old and he's having a good time in both of these films. Shatner just turned 90 and we're alone in this as critics because it gets like 18% on Rotten Tomatoes, but 90% of the audiences like it. So they're doing something right to please the crowds.
Yeah, you're right, Bill. I mean, amongst critics, it's not loved, but the 90% rating on Rotten Tomatoes is because it's a rom-com involving older people, which is refreshing. I mean, the movie industry really makes movies targeted to this audience. It's generally all about going after the youth demo. So is this a great movie? Certainly not, but it's enjoyable, especially for an older audience. Justine?
Yeah, I appreciate that about it. And I do think that's why so many audiences are approving of this film, because it's a starved market that isn't often catered to. And I have to say, Shatner's might have pretty nice chemistry here, but that's really where the high point ends. Their dynamic. There's not much to it, unfortunately. It feels more like a dated short comedy pilot for a series that never went to air.
But you're right, Neil. We need more 90-something rom-coms.
Do you think the older audience is enjoying Fast and Furious? And how many bad teenage rom-coms are there that they're out there?
This isn't Fast and Furious. This is Slow and Annoyed.
It's a fun piece of fluff for seniors, Bill, and I'm sure they're not happy watching those teen comedies. So come down off your high horse, everybody.
That explains why you loved it, obviously.
Take it for what it is, and the audience it's targeted for will find it enjoyable. Well, anyway, I had the opportunity to talk to William Shatner on Zoom. Let's take a look at that interview.
Do you still, you just did this movie. Do you still enjoy acting? Do you still get the same kick out of it as you did like years ago?
More. Every time I finish something, I think, oh, that's how it's done. I see it as a psychological examination that everybody, the character you're playing, has a different facet. How you say hello is different in every moment. I mean, you've got to examine, why is he saying hello and how does he say hello? And there's a whole psychological puzzle in any part you play. And the more you live, the more variance you can give that hello.
Next up, here's my interview with the one and only Tyler Perri.
You heard of the horse whisperer? I'm the kid whisperer.
Tyler Perri might be best known for his role as the feisty and incorrigible character Medea. But Perri's actually a mogul. If being an actor, producer, writer, and director of numerous successful films, theatrical productions, and TV shows were not enough, he also owns Tyler Perri Studios in Atlanta, one of the largest production facilities in the United States.
This is unfair.
It's your job to walk into that courtroom and make it fair.
His latest movie, currently streaming on Netflix, is the thriller A Fall from Grace.
You were here for a number of weeks at several different intervals doing your play at the Beacon Theater many years ago. I remember seeing that on the marquee. And I don't know, we're here in New York now. I wanted to know what your thoughts are on the city. Have you ever lived here? Have you ever spent significant time here other than doing the play?
I have an apartment here in Tribeca, so yeah, the last show we did here was Radio City Music Hall, and let me tell you something. And even in Brooklyn, we did Brooklyn Kings. I love the people of New York. I love the audience. I love the camaraderie. I love how you think that watching that movie was something, you should see them at one of my live shows. So I love the audiences here in New York.
Define New York City style to you. What is it that you're fond of? You said you have an apartment here. Other than the performance aspect, just like free time when you're spending some time here.
What do I love about New York?
Yeah.
Let's see. The truth of the matter is, New York is an amazing town. The architecture is amazing. The buildings and the skyscrapers as I'm walking through, it's really, really amazing. And what I try to do when I get here is focus on all the good of what it is rather than hearing the noise. Because I have friends who don't hear it. You didn't even hear that siren, did you? I'm all over I hear everything. I see everything. I take in everything. I feel people's senses and emotions. So when I'm here, I'm constantly tapped in. And listen, being Tribeca is a little more relaxed than out in all the chaos of Manhattan. It's a lot. It's a lot for a country boy who doesn't know much about this kind of madness.
Moving on, let's take a look at my interview with actor Tony Hale.
I want you to meet Forky.
In one of the biggest box office blockbusters of this past summer, Toy Story 4, Hale lent his vocal talents to the new character of a clueless spork called Forky.
I am not a toy. I was made for soup, salad, maybe chili, and then the trash.
how long did you actually work on the voice on Toy Story 4? I heard it takes years to do something like this.
I guess like 2 years ago is when I did the first recording up at the Pixar headquarters, which was crazy, by the way. And then they kind of brought me back several times. But the thing is, like, to your point, this Toy Story 4 took, I think, like 5 years to make. And we as voice actors, I'm so grateful to be there, but we're a small slice of this pie. Most of the pie is the artistry and animation that went into it. Those guys worked incredibly hard on this film.
How much flexibility do the Pixar people give you to fool around with the character and the dialogue? I mean, you do have a comedy background. You could make it possibly funnier.
Typically, when you're doing animation, you're kind of set apart. You're kind of in a private booth, and then all the writers and all of them are outside the glass, and all the sound goes off, and then all of a sudden you just see them mouthing, and you get very insecure because you think they're all talking about you, which they are. But with Pixar, you're kind of all in the same room. There was no separation. So it helped, they were very open to my ideas. It was just this really fun back and forth and incredibly organic process. That Pixar model is something special.
Next is a movie called The Artist's Wife. Bill, tell us about it.
We have a dysfunctional couple. This time it's Lena Olin. She's married to Bruce Dern. She used to paint. He is a painter, or he tries. They live in the Hamptons, and he's got a show coming up, a big show in New York City. One problem, he has dementia. Lena tries to reunite her husband with an estranged daughter. So there's a subplot going on here. There's an almost unforgivable last scene in this movie. And yet, maybe I'll be the lone guy on this one too, but I thought as great as a performance as Bruce Dern gives, I've seen him do this angry old guy before. I haven't seen Lena Olin as the suffering wife, and I thought she was outstanding as the artist's wife. For her performance alone, I recommend this film.
Well, I think you are going to be the lone person here, Bill, but let's hear what, maybe not, I don't know. Go ahead, Lisa, what's your take?
Oh, this movie was practically exactly made last year. It was called The Wife, which tells you how uncreative both people were. I mean, if this unprecedented moment in history changes anything, I really hope is that we stop having to watch movies that focus solely on the problems of bored, rich white people. The acting is great. Honestly, the acting is great. Bruce Dern is an unbelievable actor. And I think, sure, he may have done a variant on this role before, but he does it really well. But the premise of yet another woman who deferred her creative dreams for a spoiled, selfish man, and then we have to walk her through the last stages of her self-disappointment, it just made me want to throw some paint against a wall and pretend it was also $1 million painting.
Justine?
I absolutely love that, Lisa. I could not agree more. This definitely evoked elements of the Glenn Close film, The Wife, in that, yes, we're giving voice to the woman beside the tortured artist, but in that way, we still have to watch her suffering for almost 2 hours.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry to interrupt you, but yes.
Well, I recently interviewed Lena Olin for The Artist's Wife. Let's take a look at that interview. I'm sure you get a lot of scripts and a lot of stuff. What was it about this particular script or movie or the director, whatever it is, what made you decide to do this project?
I think the fact that it was about the wife, the caregiver, the one who stands next to, and her journey that I thought was interesting, and I could relate to waking up kind of through a tragedy, through when life throws something at you, that you kind of wake up and you move forward in such a brilliant way as she does. I think that's what moved me.
Did you find yourself, if somebody is going off script and improvising, I guess you have to improvise yourself.
Yeah.
How was that experience? And is that something you're comfortable with doing?
The answer is no, I'm not comfortable doing it. And for that reason, it's so much fun. If you're present in the situation, you just have to roll with it. And whatever is thrown at you, you have to throw it back and react. And I think it's a very authentic way of and if the DP and the director, if they're with you, they can catch those authentic moments.
Here's an interview I did for the latest version of the movie Shaft with Richard Roundtree, Samuel L. Jackson, and Jesse T. Usher. This is the third movie called Shaft. The first was in 1971, the second in 2000, but there were also many sequels along the way. It's an action comedy with the emphasis on comedy. It's sort of a parody, and going into this, I didn't expect that as un-PC of a movie as this is, in this era of Me Too, if you can get past that,
Why would you get past
which asks a
Why
lot,
would you?
that it is pretty funny taken for what it is. And I think what makes this funny is Samuel L. Jackson, who does have comedic chops. He demonstrated that in Pulp Fiction. And would I pay full price at the box office for this? No way. But streaming, why not? You're shaking your head.
This is bad idea genes. It's not just an unnecessary remake, it's an insultingly bad remake.
Do you like it?
Yeah, it's so good.
I hate it. Hashtag me too, I hate it.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, when you said emphasis on comedy, like where and why? I mean, the Shaft franchise is so cool when it's cool, but funny isn't cool, and I felt bad for Richard Roundtree. Like, he actually blazed the trail to make this cool, crossed over to white audiences, and now he has to show up for this.
He looked trapped.
Yeah.
Justine?
I don't think we needed another installment after the late John Singleton's version in 2000. I think the only redeeming quality is that it embraces its camp, and at least there is a clash between these old, archaic, problematic views and a fresher, modern perspective.
Well, I went up to Harlem and sat down with the stars of Shaft on location at the famed Red Rooster restaurant. Let's take a look.
Why was the decision made, and it works, to make it, like a comedy action film?
When I talked to John Davis, he strictly wanted to make a comedy. And I was going, no, you can't just do a comedy with Shaft in it. He's not a buffoon, and there's a lot of mythology that goes along with being this character. So if it's anything, it has to be an action comedy, and the action part has to be very dangerous. It can't be hokey.
What's it like playing Shaft and you inheriting the throne of being Shaft Jr., basically?
Oh my gosh, it feels great inheriting the throne and still having these two gentlemen alongside me. Like, that was the moment for me.
What's different shooting on the streets of New York now as opposed to 1970, 71?
To be real, with gentrification in Harlem, that has been the main change. I have, in my childhood, never seen so many white people in Harlem.
We in Harlem? For real? This is what's happening now?
Justine, who writes for Entertainment Weekly, is good on paper. Now she's going to tell us about a movie called Good on Paper.
Well, this stars and is written by Iliza Shlesinger, and it's billed as a mostly true story. And it centers on a struggling stand-up comedian who's unlucky in love until she meets a quirky nerd and embarks on a new relationship. But when she and her friends begin to suspect he isn't what he seems, they embark on a wild goose chase to uncover the truth. I need to use the pun a second time here and say that, well, the premise sounds good on paper. Unfortunately, this movie is such a miss. I thought there was such an opportunity to put out a strong message that touches on real issues in the modern dating landscape and its duplicitous nature. And unfortunately, why this doesn't work is that the man that she meets is a giant red flag from the moment he speaks.
Listen, I happen to think that Good on Paper, I like this film. And I was expecting a straight up rom-com, and what I got was an exploration of how complicated we are as people, how we usually never really know what we want, and how some of us assert ourselves of who we truly are versus those who put on an act. And there's a great line in the movie towards the end of the film where the lead male says, "Who is anyone anymore?" And I thought that the whole movie really made a good point about that.
Perri?
It's not perfect, but I'd say Good on Paper really exceeded my expectations for this type of movie. I would say the only element that didn't really work for me is kind of what Justine was focusing on, and it's when Dennis's behavior became so ridiculous that it's not like, is that a red, like, that is a red flag, that's ridiculous, come on. But otherwise, this is a surprisingly sincere and grounded comedy that really weaves Schlesinger's stand-up into a scripted narrative, because the way that stand-up is included here is just so well done. The stand-up is just as funny, if not more so, than the scripted portion of the film or the more narrative-driven portions.
Look, I think this was really fun and funny and entertaining. And I think I like the way Iliza Shlesinger, she wrote it, she stars in it, the way she weaves in her stand-up routines, kind of like Seinfeld. You see a little stand-up and then you see part of the movie. But I think that she's really funny. I think that Ryan Hansen, who plays the liar, is quite good. And, you know, I think it's sharp, funny, and easy to take in as a movie. I was laughing the way through. And if you buy into the premise, yeah, it does get a little wacky. But, you know, there's a lot of movies that get wacky. I went along for the ride, and I thought it was terrific. Listen, I think the premise is a good one, and I had the opportunity to sit down with Iliza Shlesinger to talk about the film. Let's take a look at that interview. So it says at the beginning of the movie, I'm paraphrasing, sort of based on a true story. How true, how much of this actually happened to you, or is it really marginal?
I would honestly say the first, maybe a little bit over 2/3 of the movie are true. Every single thing that Dennis says to Andrea is a true lie that he told me. It is a mostly true story, because that is, for legal reasons, we can't say almost 100% true, but it is very true.
This started out as a stand-up bit?
This was always a screenplay that I was working on, and I extrapolated part of it and tried to do an abridged version for stand-up, but this story is best told with an ensemble. So while I did a bit of it as a crazy story to share, it was always a script I was working on.
Next up, my interview with Kathie Lee Gifford and Craig Ferguson.
Is this your first time in Scotland?
My first time anywhere, really.
Then Came You is the name of a new romantic comedy starring Kathie Lee Gifford and Craig Ferguson. Gifford, who also wrote the film, plays a widow who sets out to travel the world with her husband's ashes.
Can I have one of your chocolates here?
That's not a box of chocolates. I'm sorry, that's my husband.
But when she meets Ferguson on the first stop on her tour, her life may be changed forever.
What you have to do is to learn how to be happy again.
What made you say to yourself, I'm able to write a movie, I can write a movie, and where did this particular idea come from?
Well, I had no idea if I could write a movie. It's all Craig's fault. If you don't like this movie, blame him, because we had hosted the Today Show together for a week a couple of years ago, and it was the most explosive week of television I had ever done in my life. I can't picture you in a kilt.
Oh, no, yes, you can.
Yeah?
Yes, you can.
If I use
yes,
my imagination.
You can.
It was so much fun and so unpredictable, so entertaining, that we went to lunch afterwards and said, you know, what can we do next that was fun to harness what we have together? Obviously, it's chemical, what we have here. And Craig was very funny. He said, you know, if we wait for our agents to get us a job on television, we'll die waiting. So why don't we write a movie together? He goes,
the reason why I think the movie works is because what Kathie did in that first little bit of writing was she harnessed the nature of our friendship. You know, and it was in a setting that made sense. And it was in a type of movie that made sense.
Both of you hosted talk shows, very successful talk shows for quite some time. Do you both miss your talk shows?
I don't miss it at all. I had never dreamed of being a talk show host. When I was growing up, there were no talk show hosts. I wanted to be Annette Funicello or Haley Mills. I wanted to do Disney movies and sing and dance. And then, you know, that was the world I longed for. And I sort of fell into television.
Kathie and I started out kind of the same way. I also wanted to be Annette Funicello or Haley Mills. But I was an actor in movies and in television, and I ended up doing the late night show.
I had braised kangaroo when I was in the Outback. not the steakhouse, no, the actual Outback.
And I did it for a while, and I'm very grateful for doing it. I loved doing that show. I really did. But I really don't want to do it again. It's done.
Next, a historical drama called The Last Vermeer. Bill?
Well, I tell you, this is a good idea for a movie. It's a little long. Let me tell you what it's about. A soldier is investigating a renowned Dutch artist, Han van Meegeren, who forges Vermeers and is sent to trial for allegedly conspiring with the Nazis. Guy Pearce is Van Meegeren, looking a little like David Spade sometimes. But the real story here is a great Danish actor, Claes Bang, who's a soldier and amateur lawyer. There are some fun scenes when they go to court at the end, but there are a lot of muddling subplots in this thing. And the thing I want to say to Guy Pearce is, move over, Kenneth Branagh. There's a new ham in town.
Lisa.
Well, there seems to be this certain ultra dedicated audience for stories about the Holocaust and that time immediately post-Holocaust. And this movie's not going to disappoint them at all. It is too long. It does have too many subplots. But I think any examination of mercenaries in the empires of great evil is very timely right now. And honestly, this is the most delightful I've ever found Guy Pearce. With his dastardly eyebrows and that smile that never quite reaches his eyes. I liked it.
Justine?
I just find this period in history so fascinating. This is kicking off just 3 weeks after the death of Hitler, and it's just such a compelling window into the grim uncertainty in Europe at the time. And I think art stands in for kind of a metaphor for how fractured one's personal and family lives became in the wake of that.
The fact that this really happened, that this is a true story, makes it all the more interesting to me. I think the first 2/3 of the movie are a little slow. It's okay, but this movie really comes alive in the courtroom trial at the end. Claes Bang, good performance, but Guy Pearce, this movie suffers when he's not on the screen. What an incredible performance, just wild. Hey, I sat down with the star of the film, Guy Pearce, again on Zoom. Let's take a look.
Quite a character, and there was quite a flamboyant touch to the way you portrayed him. Was this a choice that you made, or in your research, was this something that you came upon that this is actually the way he was?
While everyone else was, as I say, starving and struggling to deal with World War II, he was living it up, having parties. He was a very flamboyant character. He was a very hurt man. He'd wanted to be a great artist himself and had sort of been rejected by the critics in his earlier life. But he wasn't going to allow that to dictate what kind of life he led. So he lived as if he was the great success that he always wanted to be.
Well, that's about all the time we have. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, every movie we discussed is available either on streaming services, on demand, or on DVD. We'll be back soon with a brand new show where, along with my panel, we'll debate what's worth watching and what's not when it comes to new releases, hidden gems, and Hollywood classics. I'm Neil Rosen. Join us next time on Talking Pictures.